Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have a tidbit to share with you. I have a finished project, and I will give you updates on my Tour de Fleece progress spinning a Shetland sweater, and I will talk about the design I have in mind for a sweater that I will knit with this Shetland wool. So it's a pretty unusual construction, and a lot of things are new to me, but I'm pretty excited to explore it further. So let's get started. So I have one tidbit for you. It's a video, a video and then a follow-up video that showed up in my feed a few weeks ago. I actually wanted to share it with you last time and then I totally forgot. It's a video by a channel called Good Yarn Bad Knits. I'd never seen any of her videos before. I think this particular video was getting some traction, and which is probably why it got recommended to me. The title seems a little bit clickbaity, but it really isn't. And I think it's a really important and interesting discussion that she is having. And the title of the video is called, "I Don't Want Every Knitting Pattern to Be Size Inclusive." So at first you're like, what? How can you say that? That's totally unfair. Everything should be inclusive. But she lays out some important facts to understand about design and the reality of grading in sizes, whether they be larger or smaller. She is a person who has been a lot of different sizes. So she has had experience knitting for a larger body and understands the frustration with both finding patterns that are going to work well while you're a new knitter, as well as just the reality that you might need to learn to do modifications, whether the pattern is really well written or not, and how hard that can be when you are a new knitter and you don't know how to do those things. I really liked this video. I thought it was really interesting, and I agreed with many of her points. She had a follow-up to that video, which was, I read every comment on my size inclusive video. So she got comments from, including from someone from Isolde Teague, who is really good at, I really love Isolde's patterns. I've loved them since she was a brand new knitter, or a brand new designer almost 20 years ago. I've knit many of her things. She really works at good design and being inclusive and publishing charts to help knitters as well as designers who are trying to make modifications or to grade to various different sizes along that spectrum. I will leave links to both of those videos. I thought they were very good. So then she had some good points, and her perspective was from somebody who is a knitter who has been frustrated with learning to knit for her various different sizes and whatever size she happened to be at the time. So again, I will leave links to that down below. So the first thing I want to talk about is this finished object. It's this top. There is not a pattern for it. It's something I designed for myself. I bought this yarn. It's a Berroco Tillie. I bought it back in, I think, March. And I intended to knit this Lacy cardigan and then decided I was not going to wear that. So I wanted to design something that I would actually make. And in the last Casual Friday, if you saw that, I had made a boneheaded mistake that was going to cause me to rip back about 8,000 stitches. I had completed the back. So this is lace from here down, and I'll stand up in a bit so you can see it's all lace down here, and from here up it is stockinette. When I'd gotten to the underarm, that was when I divided for the front and the back, and I don't know why, but somehow when I started going back and forth, I missed the last 8 stitches of the half round. And so I made it 8 stitches too narrow all the way up to the top. Now, there are a bunch of very kind viewers who are trying to help me not rip back 8,000 stitches, because my plan was to rip back the 8,000 stitches and then see how I felt about the project right now, and if I was going to finish it now or put it to the side and wait until February when I do finish it February. And that's one of the reasons for finish it February, is when you need a timeout from a project that has gone wrong one too many times. You just need a break. I know that in February I will go back, and if it's a project I've kind of forgotten about, I will be reminded of it. So I had a plan. I had two plans, and I didn't know which I would take. So I waited a couple of days, and then I ripped it back, and I just wanted to get started on it so that I would be on the right path for when it was just straight stockinette, because what I was going to have to do was to cast on a few stitches at the end of each of the next 4 rows, and I just wanted to get that established, make sure I had the right number of stitches. And I just kept going. I re-knit those 8,000 stitches in 2 days. It's just plain stockinette, very quick. And it's, you know, it was so easy compared to the body that was all the lace, because I would make mistakes and then I'd have to fix them, and it just, you know, it takes more concentration. The stockinette, you know, very easy to do. So I just kept on, and I still, you know, I kind of knew what I wanted to do for the neck, wasn't 100% sure. And so when I, you know, before I got to where I would have to do shaping for the neck, I had to figure that out. I also wasn't quite sure what I was going to do for the sleeves, the edging on here. I knew what edging I was going to use, but I didn't know if I was going to use just 1 repeat of it or if I was going to use 2 repeats. And when I say repeat, I don't mean working the pattern and then repeating it one time. I mean working it once. Because when you talk about a stitch pattern, let's say it's 8 stitches across and 14 rows long, it has an 8 stitch multiple. So you can work it multiple times, however many times you want to work it. And then it has a 14 row repeat. So if you just work 1 repeat of the pattern, that means you're working it 1 time. When you come across instructions in a knitting pattern that tell you what to do, and then they say to repeat it twice, that can be confusing unless they say a total of 3 times or work it a total of 2 times, whatever. If they're telling you to repeat it versus work the repeat 2 times, it's a subtle distinction, and it isn't one that is very common in contemporary patterns. It used to be very common, you know, 20, 30 years ago to have the instructions for what you were supposed to do over however many rows, and then say repeat 3 times, like, so that you would do it 3 times total. So a good pattern will explicitly tell you how many times to do it. But when we're just talking about the stitch pattern properties in general, a multiple is how many stitches across, and a repeat is how many rows. So I worked 1 repeat of the pattern for the sleeve, and I worked 2 at the bottom of the hem. I did need to think a bit about how I wanted to do the neck, because if you do any kind of edging in the neck, you have to take that into account. Like, you have to make the neck that much bigger. You have to think about how do you want it to fit when it's finished, and then how much edging do you want to put, whether it's ribbing or something else, and then make the neck opening that much bigger. And I just wanted a neck opening that looks like this, and without much of an edging at all. So the chevron pattern that I use on the sleeves and at the bottom of the hem ends with 2 rounds of purls. And so I just did 2 rounds of purls for the neck. As well. The purling is going to want to curl inward a little bit, and whereas stockinette wants to curl outward, so it kind of counteracts it in a nice way. And there's enough tension on the neck that it's just staying in place, and I quite like it, actually. So let me stand up and kind of give you a 360 view of what the top looks like. So I think you can see this. So originally I started with a provisional cast on down here, worked this lace panel, then worked upwards, and then came down. But I had worked this lace panel incorrectly. It's just different from what I wanted to, and I figured out the correct way when I was doing this one. Went actually back and looked at the instructions. And so I actually came up here and took this original one out and worked that panel in that direction and then worked the chevron. And the reason I wanted to work the chevron in that direction is because it does have this zigzag edging that works really well at the bind off, but at the cast on, it's a lot more subtle. So years ago when I was experimenting with this pattern, I realized that, and I was knitting something that I wanted it at two ends of a scarf. And so I did that provisional cast on trick so that both of the edges would look the same. Let me give you a view of the back. And this stitch pattern right here has a 16 stitch multiple. And so I was able to do 14 multiples of this. So there's 7 across the front, 7 across the back. And I was able to make it so that there's stitch pattern continuity going across the beginning and end of round. Actually, I don't even know which side is beginning of the round versus the end of the round. Or maybe this had maybe this was a 14 stitch repeat and I had 16 of them, and this was a 16 stitch repeat and I had 14 of them. It just worked out really well for that. So these are all stitch patterns that I got from Barbara Walker's Treasuries. I don't know which treasury or if I use more than one. It would be the first or the second or both for these stitch patterns. What else do I want to say? Oh, when I came up I designed this with very little ease. There might be a tiny bit, just depending on how my gauge worked out. When I got up to the underarm, I did casting on so that I would get an extra inch coming out, and that would make this overhang a little bit more, and then I could add the edging and I'd have more of a sleeve. So if I hadn't added that edge or that extra at the underarm, it would have been up here, which would have been okay. And then I could have done 2 of them, but I think it kind of helps for that coming over the shoulder to give that cast on there, to give that extra length, instead of just making it a couple of inches wider to begin with. Then it's just more room under here and more bulk under the underarms as well. So it's interesting to see how this yarn is a little bit more splotchy, maybe just the skein that I was working with for the lace. It's a little more splotchy looking and a little more evenly distributed up here. But because the stitch patterns are different, I think that's okay. I'm very pleased with this result. Very happy with it. And I really like that the lace is down here and I can feel the breeze coming through to keep me cool. Very nice. This is my leftover yarn of the Tillie, so I can show you what it looks like, what the chainette construction looks like. Let me zoom in. So you see how it kind of looks like an I-cord, and then there's a bit of bounce to it, a little bit of stretch to it. Cotton doesn't have any elasticity, and so it can be kind of hard on the hands. Same with linen. I think that's just the nature of plant fibers. So having it in a chainette construction can give it that little bit of elasticity. Now, wool, when it's in a chainette construction, can end up with like twice the yardage that you would have with applied yarn when it's like 100 grams of it. I have had that happen, which means that it has a lot of air in it, and so it's warmer. And then the physical weight of the sweater isn't as much. So you think of more yarn means more warmth, but more air is more warmth as well. So you can get away with something that just doesn't weigh very much, but is very warm. So that's been my experience with chainette yarns. But I really like to look for chainette yarns in if I'm making a summer top, because those plant fibers just don't have elasticity, and they can be really hard on your hands. So that's the Berroco Tillie, what it looks like up close. You can see all the color variation in it as well. So Tour de Fleece started on July 4th. It is a worldwide, it's not really a competition for spinners, but it's something that spinners worldwide participate in it. And it occurs at the same time as the Tour de France bicycle competition. So you just set a personal challenge. It's just a way, it's like, 3 weeks to really focus on your spinning, and maybe set yourself some goals that are completely up to you. It could be something very basic, like spinning 5 minutes every day. My goals have been different in different years. One year I had 3 raw fleeces that I had never scoured, and so I learned how to do that, and I did them one after the other, and so that I really got the hang of it. It just depends. So I usually have a goal of something like spinning an ounce a day. I often do a sweater spin. I have done that 3 times, although the first time I didn't even know I was going to spin a sweater quantity. I had a couple of braids of fiber that I really liked, and I got a yarn that I really liked, so I went back and got more of that fiber and then continued spinning later in the summer. This year my goal is to work on this Shetland fleece that I purchased at a spinning retreat this spring. So I scoured it a week or so before Tour de Fleece, and then last Casual Friday I was kind of showing you how I divided this fleece out, sort of separating it by shades of gray. I've been calling it a gray-dient, and figuring out how I was going to use this in a sweater, and what I was going to do. And so the first couple of days of the tour I spent pulling little white guard hairs out of the true black. There's a small amount of true black in this fleece. I pulled a fair amount out, and then I thought, there's just going to be a few white hairs in here, because I'm not willing to do that much tedious work. And then somebody else told me that every Shetland fleece that they've had with black, there's always a few little white hairs in there, and they just think that's the way black Shetland might be. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. So I want to show you a picture of when I had carded up all of these bats. They're all about 1 ounce. I tried to card up an ounce at a time. I have the smallest amount is in the black, and the smallest amount is in the lightest color. At first I thought that the largest amount I had was in the lightest color, until I was laying bats down next to each other and I realized, oh no, I have a couple that were actually a shade lighter. So then I started blending darker colors with lighter colors in order to get more different shades rather than things that might jump a bit. So I want to go to the overhead, and I will show you what I've spun so far, some things that I'm going to change going forward, and then what all of the different colors look like, because it's just amazing what this one sheep produced, and then what I was able to do with my drum carder in order to blend things together. This is my little sample that I did before I started spinning all of my wool. I wanted to see how fine I wanted to spin it and how I wanted to ply it, and whether I liked that result, if I needed to modify things. a bit. And so I wrote everything down on here that I did, including how many treadles I did when I was plying. So like I have a double treadle. So as I'm plying the two strands together, every time my right foot goes down, I count that 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I let the stuff that's been twisted together go onto the wheel. And I usually do something, you know, more than that with my plied yarns, but I also usually do a 3-ply, and I knew I wanted to do a 2-ply for this, and so, you know, I was just kind of taking a stab in the dark. And this is what I ended up with. And at first I thought, well, maybe this is underplied. Then I compared it to some commercial Shetland wool. I have this is Jameson and Smith. And I thought, and I checked, you know, the angle of the ply. So I have this little tool called a control card. And so I checked what the angle was on here, and then checked what it was on here. And they're very similar weight. I can also use these little slots here to see, you know, how thick the yarn is in that slot. You know, so that's like a fingering is the 14 wraps per inch, and the DK is 11. So I get a sense of what it's likely going to be. And so I ended up being really happy with this. One of the reasons I wanted to do a fingering weight, something finer, was because I knew that it would go farther in a sweater. Several people have said they've never been able to get a whole sweater out of one Shetland fleece. And I thought, well, it seems like there's plenty of ounces. You know, I've made sweaters, you know, usually like a pound or something, you know, with a pound of wool, especially if I do this woolen spun method. Other people have also said that when they spin Shetland, it's a they regardless of how they spin it, it's denser than with other fibers. So I was just a little leery, and I was really wanting to make a light yarn. And so I was really happy with this. But then I spun up the first skein that I actually spun up. I'm like, this is not going to be right. And then I washed it, and I'm like, it's not enough. It hasn't, you know, expanded enough. And then it dried and it expanded quite a bit, but it doesn't quite match, you know, what I was going for. It's a little thicker and it's a little bit loosely plied. So I'm going to run this back through the spinning wheel again to add a bit more twist. But this is actually color number 2. This is color number 1. I have plied it, but I'm going to run it through before I skein it up. I'm going to run it through the wheel to get more twist in it. But so it might be hard to tell in the camera, but these are, this is the lightest color. I only have one bobbin of this. All of the in-between colors, colors 2 through 6, I will have 2 skeins of. Then the black is essentially going to be 1 skein. So the lightest and the darkest have the smallest amount, but everything else I'm aiming for 2. Now, keep in mind also that wool looks different when it is spun versus when it is just in a bat. So this is 1, this is 2. And that's because in a bat, it's got a lot of air, and once it's been spun, it's more compressed. This is color number 3. This is color number 4. On camera, it doesn't look any different, but it is different. We'll see what happens when I actually turn it into yarn. This is another color. That's number 5. This is number 6. And then we have the black. Onward and upward, I probably will still be spinning long after Tour de Fleece. My goal was an ounce a day, but because I'm spinning my singles so fine, and because I have spent some of the days doing carding and blending and things like that, I'm a little behind, but I am making progress, which I'm happy about. Before I even started spinning or blending this yarn, I was thinking about how I was going to knit this in the sweater. I didn't want to completely design it yet because I needed to spin the yarn and do some swatching and figure out exactly how much yarn I had and whether I had enough for sleeves, full-length sleeves, or how long the body could be, all that kind of thing. And I was just trying to think how I wanted the gradient to play out. Did I want to just have it play out in one direction? Did I want to have it go in two directions? My first handspun sweater was a cardigan, and it was gray, and then I dyed some of it so that into what I thought was a gradient. It wasn't as defined a gradient as I would have liked. It was 5 colors that looked more like 3. It was kind of hard to tell the difference between one and the other, although you could see they moved. So I started with the darkest at the top, then I went to the lightest, and then back to the darkest, and then to, so it went lighter, darker, like lighter, darker, all the way down, and same with the sleeves. And then the sweater I'm about to knit from some Handspun is going to be in 3 colors that start with one color at the neck, and then there's a little bit of transition with some stranded color work to the next color. So it's like almost like 3 big stripes in a way, but then the color you start with up here is the same as here and here. It's this sweater called Pixelated. I'll put a picture up there. I already have these 2 Handspun sweaters that use either a gradient or a color shift in stripes of some sort that are going downward. And so I wanted to do something different for this. And I also like to learn new things when I am knitting sweaters. So somebody in the comments, I think a few episodes ago, had said something about a sideways sweater, and people were recommending different sweaters to me. And I was looking at those patterns mostly for inspiration, but I kept thinking about the sideways idea. And I decided I wanted to do that. Now, there are typical ways of doing a sideways sweater. I know the typical way of doing it. And what I'm thinking of is going to be substantially different. So this was my original little drawing where the lightest color would be right here. And then it would be get darker and darker out to the cuffs, and then the cuffs and the hem would be in black. The amount of black I have, I don't know if I can do that. It might be something where they're half of the next to the darkest, and then just the edges are the black. I don't know yet. I'll have to see and figure out how many stitches I can get from each color, and then figure out how I'm going to do that. But that was the idea, that this would be, and the reason I wanted the lightest color to be here is because I had the most of it. And this is going to be the biggest part of the sweater, is the front and the back in the middle. And then as these get smaller, that's where, I have the least amount of that color. Typically the way I have seen sideways sweaters knit and how they're constructed, and please feel free to tell me if you know of something that is constructed differently, because I'd love to see things I'm thinking about. If they already appear in other sweaters, I'd like to see how they do them. But typically you'd start at a cuff, you'd work your way up, so you'd be knitting this flat. You could knit this in the round up to this point, but then you get to the point where you're at the shoulder, and then you cast on in each direction so that you can start knitting the body, and you're going to be knitting it. So you're knitting everything in this direction. And then you get to the point where the neck opening is going to be, and so then you would have to divide so that you are, you'd have 2 different strands. You'd be working back and forth across here, and then you would work back and forth across here. And then when you get past the neck opening, you could go back to working in one long row. And you do that until you get to the end of the body, where you'd bind off here, go across, and then bind off here, and then you do your sleeve like this, and like that. And so when you are shaping for the neck, you would be doing things like decreasing along here and increasing along here. So you'd have to pick increases and decreases that look compatible or do things to hide them. You would be binding off here. If you have a straightaway part, you'd be binding off here and you'd be casting on there. So that's the typical, is that you're knitting the whole thing in one direction. I had a couple of concerns. One was that if I had to divide in half and I'd be using two different skeins, they might be slightly different. And, you know, just what I want to do is just go from one skein to the other and not have to break away from anything. So I thought, well, I could do this with a steek, and so I could keep this all one piece and just steek this here. And then I thought, oh, okay, well then I'd still be working flat and I'd be, you know, setting up this steek flat. And then I thought, well, if I want the edges to be black, that's going to be something where I would pick up along this edge and then knit the ribbing downwards. And so if I was going to do that, I could actually knit this whole thing in the round. And so that's what this idea is. So this is essentially going to be a drop shoulder construction because it's all in one piece. So I was thinking I would do a provisional cast on here, and I would knit in the round all the way up here. And for the sleeve shaping, I'm going to do some kind of simple stitch pattern here. It might be garter stitch, it might be, I don't know, something very simple, and then do the shaping on the top side of the sleeve. And that helps to prevent as much bunching at the underarm. I do have a video on this. It's like in my sweater styles series where I'm talking about drop shoulders and modified drop shoulder sweaters and how you can put the shaping at the top to help avoid some of that bunching. But so the idea is working in the round to here, and then I can do a cast on, or I can do a provisional cast on here, and then so then I can graft that together later and not have a seam. So I could do either one, but I could continue working in the round. And so that, and do my shaping. So I'm continuing to work the entire body in the round. And then later on, when it's time for the ribbing, which I'm going to have to pick up for anyway, then I could cut that, pick up the stitches, knit the ribbing down, cut the neck opening open. And again, when I'm done with the sides, I could just put those on hold so that they're live stitches, and then I could graft those shut. Or I could bind off and seam it. Either way, it could be done. So here I would be doing increases, and here I'd be doing decreases. So that was one idea. And again, I'd have this shaping issue where I'd be doing increases on one side but decreases on the other. And so then I thought, well, what if I did the lightest one? What if I started in the middle and did a provisional cast on, and then I knit both halves of the sweater out toward the cuffs. Then when I did my shaping, I would do decreases for the sweater or for the sleeves on both sides, and they would match. And I would be doing identical shaping on either side of the neck as well. Again, there's always a bunch of different ways you can do things. And I'm not always looking for the easiest way. I'm looking for the way that's going to solve a potential problem that I am foreseeing, or eliminate an issue that I would like to avoid. So this very well could be way more complicated than it needs to be, but I'm trying to solve problems of color management, shaping, symmetry, and just trying out something that is an interesting construction. So let me know if you have seen sideways sweaters be knit in ways other than completely flat. And leave those suggestions down in the comments. And because I'd love to take a look at how other people have done things. And again, some of this is also for yarn management, not just color management, because if I'm going to be short on yarn, I want to know that in the same places going this way. It won't help me for the length of the sweater. I have to make that determination, but it might factor in on the sleeves. And this way I would know for both of them. This is my idea. And this is going to be, it's going to take me a while to finish this yarn. This is probably a project I'll be working on in the fall through the winter, because I have this other pixelated sweater I'm going to be working on next. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.